Hello and welcome to the Touchstones Tapes, the podcast which keeps you connected with us as a museum while Touchstones is closed for refurbishment. My name is Katie and I'm the marketing executive for the museum.
And my name's Rick and I'm the digital coordinator at Touchstones.
And my name is Bryan. I'm the Community and Inclusion Manager at Touchstones. We're in the studios at Media City, UK, and we are really excited to be launching this podcast. It means the Rochdale community, creative arts organisations and friends of Touchstones can all stay connected with each other while the museum is having a bit of a makeover.
Just a bit of one. It's a capital redevelopment project, Bryan. No biggie.
And as we close our doors to the real world, we are opening them in the audio world. So come on in, explore, discover and keep up to date.
The museum is closed for the next 12 months, but don't worry, you'll still be hearing from us online and on our socials and via streaming services on here. Just type in the Touchstones Tapes on whatever app you use to listen to your podcast.
And while you are there, please give us a follow and subscribe to the show on your chosen podcast listening platform. It really means the world to us.
We'll be dropping you a new episode every month and bringing together creatives, museum staff and communities all in one room to discuss some of the amazing artefacts and objects from some of our rich collections.
We'll be talking about the past, present and future of the building and looking forward to some of the exciting projects and programming which we are co-designing with local people in the reimagining of a 21st century museum. So let's get on with it. So on today's episode, we're talking queer people, places and things. We're looking into how some of our recent projects and some of our exhibitions and also how Touchstones has been involved in local pride events is helping to make us as a museum a more inclusive space for everyone. And on our roundtable today, we have some of the lovely people who have led an amazing exhibition which opened at Touchstones in 2022, which was also called Queer People, Places and Things. And the people behind that are Helen Beckett, who is Curatorial and Collections Engagement Coordinator at Touchstones, Riz who is an artist, theatre maker and facilitator, who is from Rochdale and also participated as a co-curator in the Queer People, Places and Things project, and Chris Hoyle, who is a freelance playwright, theatre director and actor, who also worked with us as a facilitator with the group on this project. Hello, Helen. How are you today? Thank you so much for coming on today to come and speak with us about this amazing project.
Thanks for having me, Bryan. It's great to be here. I'm very excited.
So we've invited you along today because the theme of the episode is queer people, places and things. And you've been quite involved in this exhibition and thinking about the museum collections. And you've been doing a lot of work about diversifying them and looking at LGBT narratives and histories in them. And we've asked you to bring along an object to sort of start that conversation. So the theme being queer people, places and things. We asked you before you came today to bring an object. So do you want to tell me, this is a really fascinating object. I'd love to learn more about it, Helen.
Yeah, so today I've brought a little statue of the Greek god Apollo. And it's one of the objects that's been identified as part of our LGBTQ plus collection that we've been working on for the last few years. So it's about 20 centimetres high, the statue. It's made of sort of a really rough finish terracotta. And at one point it would have had a white slip sort of glaze over it, which has gone a bit patchy over the years. It shows the god Apollo naked, standing with sort of a garland of leaves around his head. And Apollo was the god of sun and music in Greece, and it's very well documented that he had male lovers and relationships, and is considered by some people today sort of like a patron of same-sex relationships. He very famously had a relationship with the Greek god Hymen, who was the god of marriage. So that kind of shows that in ancient Greece, there weren't those same sort of like labels or restrictions that sort of came about on relationships sort of further down the line. It's an object I've chosen because of its age, really. Like I said, gender and sexuality played less of a role in relationships in ancient Greece, and there weren't the same definitions placed on people. So it's only sort of in the last, 2,000 years that LGBTQ plus people have kind of had to hide their identity. And this object and the person it represents, I think, shows that actually LGBTQ plus people have existed throughout human history, and being LGBTQ plus isn't actually a new label.
Wow, Helen, that is so fascinating. And I think we've been having lots of conversations about why it's so important for us to highlight these stories and, bring them to life. And I know you've been doing a lot of work around looking at other objects in the collection. Am I okay to just hold this object and see how much it weighs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I need to put a glove on?
You do need to put gloves on, Bryan. It's very old. But yeah, go for it.
It's actually quite light. Yeah. Oh, well, these things as well are really, important things that we can use to engage communities and have conversations around diversity and inclusion. And that's something that I think as Touchstones, we really want to champion and we really want to bring to the forefront in all of our work. So I'm just so lucky to work with such an ally like yourself, who's been doing this amazing work and doing that research, because that kind of takes quite a long time, doesn't it, to sort of get to that point, because these stories have been quite hidden in the collections, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, it's been very time consuming and it's a very slow process. For that reason, like LGBTQ plus history has to some extent been erased over the years. So you kind of have to read between the lines, although obviously it's great that now people are doing that research and there are more resources out there to help sort of uncover those stories. It's good to know that, there's progress being made. So yeah, it's really exciting. And today as well, we wanted to talk more about the exhibition that you worked on, Queer People, Places and Things, which is a really amazing piece of work where, we've worked with the LGBT community. I actually worked with you quite closely on that project to sort of uncover and speak to local people about their stories and their local stories of queerness and LGBTQ plus identities. But do you want to tell our listeners a bit more about that project and, how it kind of came about and why it was important that we did this work, really? Yeah, so Queer People, Places and Things was sort of like a little exhibition within a larger exhibition. So we'd been working with queer American artist Liz Collins for a couple of years, and having conversations with her about what her exhibition would look like at Touchstones. She's an artist who works predominantly in like textiles and fibre, but she was really excited to bring in a group of LGBTQ plus people to sort of help co-curate the exhibition, which fits in brilliantly with what we've been doing at Touchstones as well for the last few years, in co-creating with local communities. So it was a really sort of like natural sort of progression of our LGBTQ plus work by bringing them into the curatorial process. Liz was really excited to sort of do a reimagining of a project that she'd done previously in Brooklyn at a queer bookshop. And she wanted to design this space that could be used by the LGBTQ plus community in Rochdale to sort of programme events, or just simply use it as a place to meet and feel safe and hang out. And the idea was that the gallery would be completely curated with this amazing LGBTQ plus artwork and be really inspiring and bright and happy. So she kind of handed over the reins of that space to the community group that we worked with. And they chose artworks that they felt had an LGBTQ plus connection, whether it be the artist or the subject matter. And we curated the gallery with works from our collection, from the Juan Uriar Torres collection from Chile. We had loans from the Walker Art Gallery and from Bolton Museum and Art Gallery. So when we reached out to different people, we had all of this support to make this like amazing space happen. And it was just really interesting working with the group to see how they interpreted artworks and what, as members of the LGBTQ plus community, what they identified with artists or artworks, which I think gave the exhibition a completely different sort of narrative to how we would have programmed it. The gallery just transformed into this amazing space with this crazy floral wallpaper that Liz designed, and furniture upholstered in fabric, again, that Liz had designed, and there was rugs in there. And it just felt like this really sort of exciting, comfortable place within the larger exhibition of Mischief.
Yeah, it was an amazing exhibition, wasn't it, Helen? I think you've really described it in such a clear way there. And I can remember speaking to visitors when they would come in, and you'd feel like it was more of a relaxed lounge kind of space rather than feeling like that formal, walking into a museum or a gallery. You feel kind of like you have to act a certain way, or you have to look at things in a certain way or think in a certain way. Whereas we actually were, inviting visitors, inviting the community to come and sit on that furniture. And I was just wondering, like, if you wanted to talk more about what that kind of process was, sort of putting an exhibition together that wasn't a sort of like a conventionally curated exhibition, if you like what kind of maybe were the challenges in that, or were there any?
I think from my point of view, because I've always, the co-curation side of things was quite new to me. It was about handing over that control and that power that's usually associated with like museum and gallery staff, and just kind of letting people make up their own minds. So breaking down that approach that we would usually go with, which is always very regimented and organised. When you're working with community groups, it's got to be a lot more fluid. You've got to be a lot more flexible in the way that you approach things. So for me, it was a really great sort of like learning experience. And I think it's definitely kind of relaxed the way that I would approach exhibition making in the future. In terms of challenges, I'm not sure that anything really was a massive challenge. It was just a different way of working, which I don't think is a particularly bad thing. Particularly in museums and galleries, like we've been doing the same thing the same way for so long. It was actually nice to sort of mix it up and do something different and have other voices involved who bring new perspectives to things. And that was, I felt that was like a really positive aspect of the whole experience, really.
Yeah, it definitely was like an eye-opening learning curve, and I think we've, as a museum, have been trying to sort of formulate what that work looks like, and it is, it's a big undertaking sometimes when you're working with lots of different voices and lots of different opinions to tell their stories. So I think it's just getting used to, like you said, giving over that ownership and that power, and actually understanding like these are the voices who should be telling these stories, so we need to give space for that, really. And I think that exhibition really did that in lots of ways. And I think be interesting to know, because you talked about it becoming this space for the community to take over. What kind of things happened sort of programming wise in there? What kind of events happened in that space as well, in this lounge space that was designed?
I think we let the group program. So they came forward with suggestions of what they would like to see in that space, which was great. So we had like LGBTQ plus poetry, open mic nights. We had talks from sort of other institutions and curators on how they're approaching sort of like queering their museum and gallery spaces. I think the thing for me that I really loved was just walking through the space and seeing people actually just relaxing in it. Like, they weren't necessarily walking around taking in every artwork individually, but they felt comfortable enough just to come in with a friend and sit down and have a conversation. And I loved that. I thought that was like a really, really great outcome of the whole space.
Definitely. I think for me as well, that's been amazing, and it's really, I guess, had an impact. And I guess I've been speaking to you a lot about how this is informing some of your practice, and I wanted to ask around how this is informing a co-collecting policy and sort of what that means, because I know we've spoken a bit about how you've been looking at collections and reimagining or reinterpreting the stories within them. But do you want to talk more about that and how this sort of work is influencing policy and how we collect things and how things come into the museum, I guess?
Yeah. So I suppose identifying LGBTQ plus objects initially started as a very sort of relaxed thing that I was doing as I came across objects. So it was more identifying artists and artworks in the collection that we could label as LGBTQ plus. And so from there, as sort of a momentum is built in that we need to make sure that our collections are actually representative of everybody in Rochdale. And there are so many groups that aren't represented or historically have been left out of museum collections. And I think that's what makes museums and galleries quite dated in a way. Like, it stops people from visiting if they don't see themselves represented within them. So I suppose from this project, because it was such a really lovely positive experience, it's like, right, okay, how can we keep this going? How can we do this for other groups? How can we make Touchstones and our collections something that they get really excited about and want to be involved in? So going forward, the idea is that through co-collecting, which is contemporary collecting, and it'll involve going out into the community and sort of encouraging people to either donate their objects or their stories, so that we create this collection that's more representative and inclusive, and people feel like they have ownership over. So there will be a strong emphasis on sort of collecting oral histories, because at the end of the day, objects in museums don't really hold any value or meaning without the human story behind it. That's what makes them interesting and special. That's kind of one strand of co-collecting, is this sort of like active collecting within our community. And then there's the second strand, which will involve bringing community members into sort of the decision-making process. So at the moment, we have an acquisitions panel that meets to decide on what objects sort of come into the collection, and that's based on certain criteria and things like that. But by bringing community members into that decision-making process, it makes it more transparent. It hands over some of the power that we have to our local community to make their own decisions about their cultural heritage, really.
It's so interesting, that, Helen. I think, it really shows how, what impact this project's had, and for it to inform a policy like that, it's a really exciting prospect to hear. And I just love the work that you do. I think it's so amazing, and it is, like you said, it's really important for us as a museum. We kind of have a responsibility, don't we, to tell people's stories in an authentic and in an organic way and on their terms. And there's a real, we could go into that for another episode, but there's a real history of how objects have come into collections, and I think we want to address that and talk about that, don't we, really?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing about co-collecting is because it's active collecting with people that are in our community today who we can actually talk to. We can make sure that the things that we collect and the stories that we collect are from them and their own voices. It's not us interpreting them, it's them telling us what their heritage is, which I think is really exciting.
It's really interesting to hear about the work that's developing around co-collecting, and I'm really excited to hear, these potential oral histories that might be recorded, and what stories and different ways of us of handing over that ownership, Helen. But I was just thinking, lastly, to ask about our new building. Obviously, we're closed for redevelopment at the moment, but what kind of things, based on this work you're developing around co-collecting, how might that be experienced, or what kind of things might we see or hear in our newly developed building of Touchstones?
So I think obviously there'll be an emphasis on the collections. People will be able to see historic objects from the collection alongside contemporary objects that we've collected over this period. We'll be bringing objects from different cultural groups together. We'll be bringing artworks alongside social history objects, alongside archive objects. People will get the opportunity to hopefully listen to some of the oral histories we collect. We just want to utilise our collections the best that we can and create a space where that really celebrates the community and everyone that we have in Rochdale, and puts them at the heart of what we do, I suppose, as an organisation. I think it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be like multi-sensory. It's just going to be like a really fun celebration really of what Rochdale and its history is.
I'm so excited to see what happens, Helen. Thanks so much for coming on the Touchstones Tapes podcast today and sharing your expertise, knowledge around collections, and your openness to working with people and giving an agency over how we tell stories. And for sharing such a fascinating object. Can't wait to talk more about this afterwards.
Thanks for having me, Bryan. It's been great.
So now we're going to chat to Riz and Chris to learn more about the community side of this project and their involvement. So Riz, I wanted to ask you first about your involvement in the project and what it meant to you to be part of it.
I think the word I would use would be reclaiming. Being queer and part of the LGBTQ community and South Asian in Rochdale, my experience hasn't always been positive. So coming in as a participant and meeting other members of the community and being at this stage in my life was really wonderful to kind of explore who I was and kind of Rochdale's history and what Rochdale holds for the community and how it can be a safe space. So it was really nice, and it kind of was re-owning Rochdale a little bit with my own identity.
And I can see we've got an object here that you've picked from the collection that I believe we used in the exhibition that you chose to be displayed as part of the Queer People, Places and Things exhibition. Can you talk a bit more about that and why you've chosen it.
Yeah, so the performance piece, which is called Performance by John C. M. Loynes, which will be in the show notes below, a link to it, was a piece created in 1933. It was created for Rochdale, and it's a very vibrant piece, and it's of a jester with a paint palette. And being a theatre maker, one of the practitioners, or one of the kind of people I looked at quite a bit, and a lot of my work's gone into, is Judith Butler and her kind of work around performance and performance identity, and how identity is a performance. And that painting really resonated with me and kind of influenced is a lot of my writing, and how I now experiment with how I present myself, how I present my work, and how people take in my presentation, and how it is literally all just a performance, and how much theatre and art and performance can feed into the LGBTQ community. So that's why I picked that piece, and I love clowns, so it was fitting.
It's such a bright and vibrant piece, and it really stood out in the space, didn't it? It was really beautiful to see that in there amongst everything else. There was also your personal object that you had in the space as well, wasn't there? Yeah,
so the personal object was a zine I was published in, I think last year, the year before, called Transliteration, which is a collection of trans and non-binary writers' work, and it was published in the US. And what I gave to the exhibition, actually to this archive, so it should be somewhere in here, is my own poetry and my own writing around my own gender identity, because I'm non-binary, and how I explored that within my writing. And that was really nice to kind of see how this performance piece, this painting, was right next to something written about me performing in all these gender all throughout my life so far.
Amazing. Yeah, it was really great to have that object in there, to have some text in there in the space. But it kind of leads into your involvement in the project, Chris, because I know you spoke about your sort of you performed in the space, Riz, but you worked really closely, Chris, with Riz to develop that performance and direct that performance with Riz and another one of the participants, Jen. But what was it like coming into the project and working, coming from a sort of a theatre background, working in a gallery space?
No, it was great. I mean, it was great to, I'm from Rochdale, you see, so I'm a Rochdale lad. And actually what was really great about coming in to work with the group was the recognising the importance and the need for such a group like that within the community. Because it was something I never had when I was growing up. Obviously times were very different then, I'm 43, I'm getting on. But obviously Rochdale and the support for, queer young people, and not just young people, it was a really intergenerational group. It was just really exciting to come in and work with them. And obviously now you've asked me to do this podcast, I've seen the group explore the themes and have, responses to parts of the collection, but I never got a chance to take part in it. So you've asked me to do what they've done. So it's been, it's exciting to do.
So what is the objects I've seen you've brought today?
Well, I've brought in an object. Because I've literally dug it out quite recently, because I'm about to start working on a project which I wanted to dig it out for the person I'm working with. But then I'm also very inspired by a piece, a painting from the collection. So, but there's a connection between the two of them. So, should I start with the painting or the object?
Whatever you want.
Okay, well, I'll go to the collection first then. The collection, the piece there, and the piece that I'm really inspired by is the painting Our Town by L.S. Lowry. Because I'm a real sucker for an industrial landscape backdrop, and I think there's something really powerful about the Industrial Revolution, and also that's connected to Rochdale being part of the cooperative movement, and making up the being part of the general sort of areas that make up Greater Manchester that made it the powerhouse it was in the height of the Industrial Revolution. I've got a painting, a replica of Lowry's very similar to this. It's from the same collection. The one I've got is so-called the Sunday scene. So it's the one where the smoke is not coming out of the factory chimneys, it's coming out of the homes, and everyone's in the street and everyone's, having a day off. And, it's one thing that we need to remember is that, Greater Manchester gave the world the weekend, invented the 2 days off of rest. So I get very inspired by that. And also Stephen Lowry, Lawrence Stephen Lowry, was actually born in 1887. So this is the connection into the object that I've brought in today. In 2014, I was working on a project called Two Spirits, where it was looking at Buffalo Bill's Wild West show visit in 1887 to Manchester and Salford. And along with the show came a whole theatrical show of 100 cowboys, 100 Native Americans, a herd of buffalo, Calamity Jane, the real Calamity Jane, and the Deadwood Stage came over. And anyway, I won a commission for Home when it had very just first started, the arts venue in Manchester, to write a play about this idea. And then I went into a whole exploration of researching Native American attitudes towards queer people, known as Two Spirits, and kind of incorporating that into the story. So I was really lucky enough to spend some time on the Native American reservations out in South Dakota. So the object I've brought here is from that visit, and it was a gift from a two-spirited Native American medicine man called James Shot with Two Arrows, and it's basically, I'll describe it. It's a necklace designed in a very traditional Lakota way because it was from the Lakota Sioux nations, and it's almost like a big medallion that's made up of tiny little beads, and there's something very majestic about it.
Thanks for sharing those objects. That painting is one of my favourite paintings as well in the collection by Lowry. We did a project where we've taken them out into communities and taken them out in a van, which has been a bit mad, but it's been really fun. But they're really accessible pieces of work to talk about. So thinking about, I guess, the programming within the space as well, it was very important for the group to be really involved in, deciding what kind of things we see animated in those spaces. And I know you both worked really closely together, and you put together a performance that that we had in the space alongside all of these objects from members of the group. Do you want to talk a bit more about that performance, Riz, and what it meant to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my performance were based off a series of poetries that I'd written with and around Touchstones, around my own gender identity, but also there was a short story in there about the laundrette where near I grew up, and that was the piece that sparked the idea of I actually want to perform this, and I think this is so important for this to be presented, and having the opportunity for me to be able to kind of share my journey in Rochdale as an LGBTQ person through the stories was really lovely, and it felt like I was able to share part of me that I hadn't been able to share freely before, and it was very empowering. I'm not doing good for a podcast. Empowering for me to do it. And honestly, I was a bit hesitant for this because I've not performed for quite a few years because of the pandemic, and I was like, what's this going to look like? How is this going to be? But having Chris on board as director and kind of helping me and kind of working through it was amazing, because it kind of tightened me up where I needed to go, and I felt more confident. And performing in that space was so gorgeous. In that space, it was the third gallery along, and it was just beautiful. It was where all the images we picked were in there, and all the objects we'd chosen were in there. And there was rugs and furnishings which were designed by Liz Collins. It was gorgeous and such a homely environment. And to perform in that space was beautiful and so warm, and it was amazing. But again, I wouldn't have even been able to have those steps or have that opportunity without Bryan supporting, going, you should perform this writing, and without Chris going, that's really good, we need to get this somewhere. And it was really nice to have that moment to share my story.
Yeah, it was beautiful and a real privilege to be invited into Riz's world to work with them on this, because the piece in the laundrette was so authentic, and you know that voice was so unique for you, and you really took us into that world. And it was a beautiful piece, you know, to work with you on.
Thank you. Yeah,
it was really amazing, and I think you were saying as well, Chris, before, how it's so important that we have, you know, groups or projects like this. And I know you've done quite a lot of work on thinking about queer spaces and how we sort of can work with communities to activate those spaces through, you know, arts and theatre and culture.
Yeah, I mean, the group, there is such a need for the group that, you know, runs out of Touchstones with this. And as I mentioned before, it's really intergenerational. And I think that was one of the big importance of that support, and to be able to have conversations. And you know, everyone that was a member of that group was so different, and had very different needs for being there as well. But it was a real supportive group. And they were all incredibly creative in some way, and you know, some of them had a very direct and, you know, were very aware of what their creativity was, and some of them were on a journey to explore what they were. And I think, you know, everyone was so supportive of each other's work, that it's necessary for groups like that to exist. And you know, I was surprised at the real diversity of queer people living in Rochdale, actually, which was a good thing to know, because you always associate queer people living in big metropolis like, you know, Manchester, and, you know, rather than living out of the metropolis of what Manchester can give queer people, because it shows that Rochdale too can do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important. I think we spoke previously, both of you, about like creating a safe space as well. I was just wondering what, you know, both of your thoughts were on like what makes a space safe, and how do we create a space that's inclusive? What were the elements of that worked for you?
I think the space to explore who you are without judgment and without expectation. There was no expectation in the sessions to do something or be someone. It was just come as you are, be as you are, and then that's all we want from you. And that was really nice. And like a lot of us were doing this in and around work, and it can be quite daunting. And a lot of people have to kind of mask or hide their sexuality or their gender in their workplace, and it can be very exhausting. So being somewhere where they could just go and not have to worry was lovely. It was so refreshing. And there's a little bit of an age gap between me and Chris. So I'm 25, and when I first came out in Rochdale, I was 16, so 10 years ago almost, and there was nothing at all. And I remember going to this LGBT youth group held by the Proud Trust, and there was 2 other people there, and that was it. And sometimes it'd just be me who turned up. But now to be like in a room full of people of different age groups and different backgrounds was so lovely. And it was nice to be like, this is so progressive, and none of us have to do anything while we're here. We can just be us. And it was nice to hear everyone's stories and experiences and go, okay, so it's not too bad. Things aren't too bad. They're all right. So it's a positive impact. But also, it wasn't all sunshines and rainbows. There was some really sad stuff that also came out. And I think that is very important to also document. And I think we really did voice those kind of difficulties and concerns when we were in those groups. And from that, we were able to go, okay, we see that there needs to be a space, not just for young LGBTQ people, but LGBTQ people of all ages. Maybe we need specific groups of marginalised groups to kind of help people on a broader spectrum. So that was kind of my take on it.
No, I mean, as we just mentioned earlier about the group, some were of a professional level of working on their practice, and some were exploring it, and there was no pressure to deliver a finished piece at the end of it, because it wasn't just the finished piece. That was the whole point of this exercise, and this it was about the journey and the process. I mean, obviously, my job was there to kind of steer the group into making them commit to the actual project as well. And obviously, at the beginning, everyone's like, very laid back and relaxed, and then 2 weeks before, it's like, oh, okay, it's got real now. And obviously working very closely with Jen, what was amazing was, it was like even a week before the exhibition was due to, the piece was due to be shared. I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but there was a real crisis of confidence at that moment. But sometimes you need that sort of commitment to the creative thing, and everybody does, no matter what level you're at of experience of working on a creative project. You always think just before you're going up, way before you're about to share it, oh my word, have I done the right thing? What am I doing this? Why have I put myself through this? And I think, and obviously what was amazing, because obviously, I could see Jen was either going to go two ways at one point, but actually it was great to work with Jen and then seeing, how, they delivered it in the end, which was absolutely brilliant, it was great.
It was also really interesting to see how people took we got similar stimuluses, but how they went on their own creative journey with the kind of work we did around. So Jen did a much dance and movement piece, which was completely different, because I had done a spoken word piece, and we'd both been in those sessions, but we both took something completely different out of those sessions, which was really wonderful to see.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, and even some of the pieces that were there statically as well. I mean, like I said, every artist was working in a very different creative field. So and that was great. That was what it was not geared to one discipline. And there were some beautiful ideas there from the whole group, weren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
What was really beautiful at one point as well, I know you hosted some open mic nights in the space as well.
Yeah, I did.
And there was a moment where all of the group were there supporting each other, like singing, or Roland was singing and playing the guitar.
Yeah, he was just up there for a good half an hour singing, and it was glorious. And he sang some of his own songs, which were about his experience growing up in and around Rochdale or Greater Manchester as a young gay man. And now Roland is retired, and it was really nice to kind of let him have that platform to hear them. And I remember messaging Roland after it and being like, you need to record those songs. We need to get them somewhere. We need to keep them safe, because I feel like the LGBTQ generation before us, because of what happened and the AIDS crisis, a lot of history there is lost and forgotten, and we need to treasure that in some way. So hearing Roland, I cried, I'm going to be honest. It was just so beautiful. And sometimes I'll go to my partner, do you remember when Roland sang? And she'd be like, yeah, it was gorgeous, wasn't it? But he was up there and it was gorgeous. And there was also really joyful moments with his whole family being around, and we were all singing songs, and it was beautiful. And there was also really heart-wrenching moments, like in the first open mic night, a young man came in, and he hadn't planned to come in, and I'm not too sure how it enrolled, but he stood up at one point at the microphone and told us his story, and he had been put in danger for being part of the LGBT community and was now in foster care. And he was now having to move out of Rochdale to become safe. But he'd come that night and he'd found that community that night. And so many of us were just taken aback. And quite a few people, not quite a few, but there's a couple of people there who was like, you've really opened the door for me and made me rethink why I'm thinking some of my values, which was really beautiful. And it kind of, for me, it was like, yeah, that's what we've done. We've done that. We've opened some of those doors for people to think, but we've also created that safe space, and that for me will always be a highlight in my life now, because it was just so pure and beautiful and sad and heart-wrenching, but so needed. So needed. But it was gorgeous.
Definitely was. I think like it really, going back to that whole thing about creating a safe space, that really showed like how you the elements of that, bringing that space together with people where you can share and feel like you're heard or see yourself seen in a space is so important, isn't it? And especially in a gallery and a museum space.
Yeah.
It's really important for us to ensure that we, create a framework where people can do those things and can share stories and can, celebrate each other's diversity in a really positive way, but also, feel vulnerable as well in that space is really important, isn't it? But I was just thinking, off the back of this work and this project, is there anything that's kind of inspired you to do, more projects or work like, with similar themes like this?
Oh, I mean, I've got a million projects in my head if you want to sit down and...
I know, Chris.
Have an hour, Bryan. Of course, yeah. I mean, I think, I'm a Rochdale lad. I'm from Middleton, and I think reconnecting with the town of Rochdale and also trying to also support the queer community as well. It's just a brilliant thing. So I'm always cooking up ideas of what stories can be explored, how what are local stories we can uncover, and explore. And I was gonna sit down with you whenever you want, and I'll pitch you some ideas if you want.
Go ahead.
I think for me, we've spoke about this in the reflection session, and so something we all spoke about was having a continuous group meetup at some point, and Touchstones, I believe, will now be closed. Well, you're listening to this, is that correct, Bryan?
Yes.
Not closed forever, it's just getting renovated.
Yeah.
But that I'm hoping that there's space in the new building with the opportunity of the group meeting up, maybe expanding, maybe that safe space becoming a permanent safe space for not just the members who partook in that project, but everyone who needs it in their life at that moment. And I'm also working closely with another company within Rochdale where we'll be kind of looking at marginalised groups and developing work along there. And I'll be kind of looking at the queer aspect of their work in the future, hopefully.
And Chris, what would you like to see, animated in our new spaces at Touchstones when we reopen after our redevelopment? And how can we be more inclusive and advocate for the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, I think you're doing a great job of it already, I must say. And obviously, I think what it does highlight is that the work that comes out of Touchstones, it's more than just a building. You're more than just a museum. You're more than just a gallery. It's about the community it serves in many different forms. And obviously, to be creating a safe space for LGBTQ plus people, as well as a space where they can also explore creatively. And have and also have conversations. So I'd say just keep doing more of what you're doing there, and and there's clearly participants that need it, and audiences as well.
Brilliant. We'll just carry on then. We'll just keep on doing what we're doing. That's great. Thanks for the tips. Thanks so much for coming on this month's episode. Before we go, how can we find out more about any work that you're both doing? Or is there anything you want to tell us about, you want to plug? Here's your moment.
Oh, I can't really say much about what's coming up. I feel like you're in the same boat, aren't you, Chris?
Yeah, kind
Contracts.
of.
They just tell you not to. But you can find out some more about me and the work I do with the my social media, which will be linked below in the show notes.
I mean, I'm I'm in the process of actually putting together a website for the very first time in my creative career, but I'm not quite ready to give you the details yet. So I could talk about a couple of projects I've got coming up. I'm directing a really exciting project, which is a virtual reality project, which is a total new thing for me, and also working with the writer Jamie Starbowski, who runs Queer Media UK, and it's going to be an exhibition, which is one of the reasons why I brought this object in today for you, because I already had it out to show him, because it's got a Native American two-spirited connection to it, and it's a really exciting project, which is looking at the photographs of Therese Farrer, who photographed the first AIDS hospice in 1990 out in America. Those very famous, you'll have seen them, very famous photographs. One with a guy called David Kirby, whose family, he was dying, and the family let this Therese take photos. Anyway, in the collections of photographs, there's a hand also caring for them, and it was a two-spirited Peter, a two-spirited guy from the same reservation where I got this from. So that's kind of how it all it sort of connects, really. So I'm doing that, and there'll be some information on queer. There is a page already open about the project on Queer Media UK. And I'm also about to start writing a play with Box the Tricks Theatre Company, who are a new writing theatre company based in Manchester. I'm writing a play about family trees, family secrets, intergenerational exploration of folk music. There's all kinds of stuff going on in it. So that will be on their website shortly, I imagine. So yeah, that's where I'm up to for the rest of the year.
Great. I'm really excited to hear more about that. Thanks so much again, both, for coming on for this month's episode.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to have a look at some of those coat of arms in a minute.
Time to play hide and seek. No, thank you for having us, Bryan.
Thank you. That was so amazing to hear about all of the work that's going on. As a gay person myself, it's amazing that we're able to do this work. I don't think I've been able to see myself in museums and galleries as a younger person. So I'm so glad, as an organisation, as a museum and as an art gallery, we're really giving space to this, and I'm working with fabulous people that are really working as strong allies and doing their work and their bit to make this all of our labour, because it really is, and it's really important for our communities to serve them and give space to making an inclusive and safer space for all. Back to you, Katie, in the studio.
Thanks, Bryan. I agree. How brilliant was Helen? She's a fountain of knowledge on ancient Greece and ancient gods, that's for sure. And I never knew that Greater Manchester invented the weekend until now. So thanks, Greater Manchester, and thanks, Chris. Every day is a school day on this pod. That's all for this episode of the Touchstones Tapes. Thank you so much for listening, folks. We also want to thank Audio Always, who have helped us to make this podcast. We'll be back next month with a brand new episode. Don't forget to make sure you follow and subscribe to the Touchstones Tapes on the app you use to listen to your podcasts. And you can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram